All right, welcome everybody to, or welcome back, I should say, everybody, to another exciting episode of Under the Dome. I'm your host, Alan Ulrich, here with Bob Rose. How you doing tonight, Bob?
I'm doing just fine, Alan. We're nearing the end of the dog days of football summer. I hope you guys are doing all right. And again, I'd like to publicly wish all of our condolences to you and your family.
Yeah, thank you so much. For those who may not have known, part of the reason why we were off for 2 weeks, last week, of course, was the 4th of July, so like everybody else, I had things going on. I'm sure you guys had things going on. So we weren't going to do a show on the 4th of July anyway. But yeah, 2 weeks ago, my mother passed away, and we did a funeral and so forth that Tuesday. And I had a lot of people in the house, obviously, after the funeral. And so it was kind of chaotic. So I appreciate all the well wishes and the condolences. For those who may not know, my mom had been battling dementia for 10 years, and it's a horrible disease. I really hope no one ever has to go through it because they call it the long goodbye, but it's really painful because for all practical purposes, my mom has been gone for at least 5, if not 7 of those 10 years she was battling it because you lose your personality, you lose what makes you who you are. And, at the funeral and stuff, we talked about the stories and her laughter. And that's what most people remember the most, is that she was a fun, vivacious person who found humor in anything. She'd even find humor in her own condition. And she loved to laugh. And when that laughter was silenced, that was probably the hardest part, for all of us to deal with. So as I wrote in the eulogy, I look forward to hearing that laughter again soon. So, and it's something, those who've lost a parent. Thank you, Anna. Those of you who have lost a parent know what I'm talking about. So anyway, just before the show came on, I was at lunch actually today, and when the news broke that Alvin Kamara has pled no contest, which I kind of thought he would do. I didn't know if he would do no contest, but I had a feeling as this thing dragged on, he was going to look for some sort of plea bargain, a plea agreement, just to get this over with. He pled to a misdemeanor. He also settled the civil suit too.
Mm-hmm.
So he doesn't have a trial now coming up on, I think, the 21st. I think was the day of the trial.
31st.
31st. Okay. Yeah, just as training camp was starting. So basically the judge has to sign off on the deal, and I can't see why he wouldn't. But now we wait for the punishment because, as I've been saying to everybody since this whole thing started, Goodell's not going to do anything until the legal process has pushed itself through. Bob, what do you think is going to happen next?
First of all, I was actually a little bit surprised that Kamara pled no contest because he had ample opportunity to do so over the last 17 months, which is how long this saga has drug on for. He and his legal representation had said over and over again that they were going to fight this. They were pleading not guilty. They had evidence to counteract what the prosecution had and everything like that. I have to wonder, and we'll never find this out, but I have to wonder if Saints management and coaches maybe went to Kamara and said, listen, we need this thing wrapped up as quickly as possible. Because, Kamara was never not going to be punished. There was never any doubt about that. The only questions were when it was going to happen, and how long it was going to be for. Now that he has pled no contest, and as you said, there's not going to be a criminal trial, there's not going to be a civil trial. That speeds up this, where the NFL can step in by about 4, maybe as long as 6 weeks. So that's very significant for Kamara and the Saints as far as on the football field, because now there's no reason why the NFL can't step in immediately and or fairly soon and issue their punishment. Because I know what the NFL said. We've been monitoring the situation. Again, guys, you had 17 months to monitor this situation, so the league, had better be prepared to act quickly. Because I'm convinced that one of the reasons why Kamara pled no contest now is to get this next step rolling, and this next step is NFL punishment. Now, in regards to that, it's considered a violation of the NFL's personal conduct policy, which is an agreement between the league and the players' union. Typically, for this kind of infraction, which falls under the category of domestic violence, assault, public endangerment, issues like that. Typically, the baseline suspension is 4 to 6 games. Now, the important caveat to remember here is that the commissioner's office reserves the right to step in and lengthen or reduce said length of suspension. Now that the felony assault charge is off the table, because the Kamara's no contest plea took care of that, you would expect that it would revert back to the baseline suspension of 4 to 6 games. Kamara also has the right to appeal whatever the league punishment is. So keep that in mind too. What I suspect will happen, what I've always suspected will happen, is that the NFL will hand down a 6-game suspension, because frankly, anything more is overtly ridiculous. And would just, in my opinion, prove what a lot of us have felt all along, is that Goodell has a burr in his britches for the Saints. So I expect a 6-game suspension. I would think that Kamara would appeal that, or at least go through the appeal process. But Saints fans that are hoping for him to get off scot-free, again, that ain't going to happen. At best, I would expect an appeal would take Kamara down to 4, maybe best case scenario, a 3-game suspension.
Do you think that the suspension would take place beginning week 1, or do you think that the appeal process could push this to? I've talked about this when Matt was on a couple of times. That middle of the season, I was saying this is a great stretch for Kamara to be out. Say from Tampa in New Orleans to the bye week right after the Minnesota Vikings game. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, 7 weeks actually. So let's say skip Tampa, go straight to New England. Starting say October 6th, going all the way to the bye week. Do you think it's possible that he could delay it at least the first month of the season?
It's certainly possible. But again, given when this no contest plea occurred, you would think that the league would now step in relatively quickly and hand down their suspension. And if they do that, then the suspension would take place, if not week 1, then very early in the season. Now, to your point, if Kamara appeals, at that point, the league would then schedule an appeals hearing, as you know, Alan, schedule an appeals hearing for Kamara to present his case to Goodell and league officials. So that it's that part that that creates a gray area, because maybe the league would not hear Kamara's appeal right away, and if they don't, then Alvin would presumably be able to play until the appeal was heard. So at that point, then the suspension would take place a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks into the year.
of course, we're going to jump right as you were saying that. Okay, so we missed the very last part. At least I did. You were saying if the league doesn't, the appeal process doesn't happen right away and they schedule it for later,
Mhm.
then what were you saying right after that?
Yeah, I said at that point, then you could be looking at a delay in Kamara's suspension, for the first 4, 6, maybe 8 weeks of the year.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's kind of been my mindset that he's going to appeal whatever they hand down. I would be surprised. Although, like you said, the no contest thing surprised me too because I thought he was going to fight this because he's let this stretch out so long. He's
Mhm.
going to continue fighting this. So I expect him to appeal a 6-game suspension immediately. So you're looking at probably a scheduled hearing, probably during training camp, maybe right as training camp breaks, because since the Saints don't go anywhere, used to be training camp broke and then they came back to New Orleans
Mhm.
from La Crosse or Vero Beach or Mississippi or wherever they had training camps in the past, Greenbrier. Um, so they don't really technically break camp anymore.
Right.
They just go straight into practicing for the regular season, right after they do the final cut downs. So you're looking at a 3-week preseason. If they have a suspension hearing or appeals hearing, I think it would take place probably week 1 or week 2 of the
Mhm.
season. So that's why I'm saying if I'm just looking at the schedule again, if they have an appeals hearing, say week 1 or week 2, that could carry him all the way until at least September 24th, and that's the week they play at the Packers.
Mhm.
So that Tampa game, the first week of October, could be if it happens immediately. Now, if the league kicks us into overdrive, they want to get this over with too. They could schedule a hearing the week of the Tennessee game. Kamara might play that game, and the suspension is effective immediately right before Carolina that Monday, the week of the Carolina game. So there's still some things that are going to go up in the air. It's not settled, but like you, I think it's going to be 6 weeks minimum. I will be surprised if it's reduced to 4. I'm expecting 6 weeks. Now, that being said, he pled to a misdemeanor assault charge,
Mhm.
not the felony. Will that hold any weight with the commissioner's office as
Alan, I
far as
think it
suspension?
should.
Right.
I think not only should that hold weight, but the fact that Kamara has been in no trouble on or off the field, he's never been the center of any kind of controversy or negative publicity at all before this incident or since this incident. I think both of those things should be big feathers in Kamara's cap.
Mhm.
But again, in you could call me a conspiracy theorist if you want, but we're talking about Roger Goodell and the New
Mhm.
Orleans Saints here. So that's why, if it were anybody else, I would say, yeah, I think he has a pretty good chance of maybe even pleading it down to a 2-game, 2 or 3 game suspension. But I'm with you because of the team that Alvin Kamara plays for and the past that
Mhm.
this franchise has had with the commissioner's office. I think that they come right out of the gate with a 6-game suspension, and if Kamara's lucky, if we're lucky, that it gets pled down to 4 games. I'd
And
consider that the best case scenario.
yeah, and beyond the fact that it's Kamara and it's the Saints and it's Roger Goodell, I think the video is damning.
It is.
Um, if because I remember when Ray Rice got suspended 2 games, and
Yeah.
then the video came out of him punching. That's the video that he punched his wife and she was out cold in the elevator,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that when that video came out, that's when the outrage really was sparked,
Hmm.
because we're a visual society,
Hmm.
um, and we tend to, especially when it comes to athletes, we tend to take the attitude of, well, they were probably, I don't want to say asking for it, but they were probably harassing or provoking the athlete to the extent that they were looking to get, F around and find out, basically.
Yeah.
That's the term today. That somebody thought he was a tough guy and blew up in front of Kamara and his crew, and Kamara put him in his place. But the video shows something different. The video shows a very, one guy getting the crap kicked out of him by 6 guys, including Kamara, or 4 guys. And then the audio tape came out, what was it, 6 months ago now, where Kamara was bragging about hitting that dude, and that doesn't help either. So that's why I think that because that is out in the public, Goodell's going to protect the shield and is going to come down hard. So that's why my hope is if there's a soft part of the schedule, I think the Patriots, Texans, I'm giving the Jaguars credit. They are a good team. But the Patriots, Texans, Colts, Bears, and the Vikings who are imploding, that's a good stretch to basically lose a guy like Kamara. Plus, you've gotten a little bit of time now that you're into October that you could kind of work Kendre Miller in. You kind of know what he is because here's the other thing. This is what I do during the off season. I watch old games during the off season. I throw that stuff on the screen behind us. This is 2011, by the way. But I watched some old games, and I watched a lot of the 2017 season, and boy, that was a fun season. I just kept remarking how fun that was. But you watch those first 2 games in 2017, then they go to Carolina and get the big win against Carolina, go overseas and shut out Miami. You saw Adrian Peterson trying to be worked in those first couple of weeks. Then Alvin Kamara comes in, and they trade Peterson away. And Kamara starts to make an impact on the team, and you start to see why he was going to be Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think that's what Miller's going to be looking for. I think Miller's going to have an impressive preseason, and then it'll be a couple weeks until they can kind of work him in and figure out how they're going to use him. So when Kamara gets suspended, boom, here we go. Now it's Miller time, to use a 70s expression. I mean, does that seem like a reasonable hope, I guess?
It is a reasonable hope, and more than that, it's a reasonable expectation. The Saints prepared for this moment, by not only drafting Kendre Miller, but also bringing in Jamal Williams. They not only prepared for this moment, but they bolstered their backfield depth, which, in my opinion, has been a glaring weakness for the last 2 years now. And I absolutely think that both Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller, and certainly combined, have the capability of shouldering the backfield load while Kamara is suspended. Because remember, too, you have some guy named Taysom Hill that's going to take some of those rushing responsibilities, too. So I think this backfield in general is far more prepared this year than they have been for either of the last couple of years. If Kamara were to be absent, not only by suspension but by injury as well. Because if people were sleeping on how good Jamal Williams really is, and like you, I watched a lot of Kendre Miller tape leading up to the draft. I love Kendre Miller coming into the draft. And I think he's going to be a terrific NFL back. But he is a rookie, and week 1 against the Tennessee Titans will be his first meaningful NFL action. That's significant for any rookie drafted in any round. So we should expect that it may take Miller a couple of weeks to really get his NFL footing down, for no pun intended, and really get used to and acclimated to the speed and the complexities of the NFL game.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people probably sleeping on Jamal Williams because he was a goal line back, and yes, he rushed for 1,000 yards, but it's like I don't know how to explain this other than it was not like you saw these huge runs out of Williams that
No.
told you that okay, that's going to be an awesome back. That's going to
Mm-hmm.
be a great back. It was a very workmanlike 1,000 yard season, and if that's possible to say that, it feels like he got that 1,000 yards, 3 yards and 4 yards at a time, not 65 yards or 200-yard games and that kind of stuff. So. I'm curious to see how he gets worked into this offense. I'm hoping he is that inside power back that just pounds people. So, because I think that allows, if he is that kind of back, that's going to not only allow Miller to kind of work his way in and get used to the NFL speed and not have to rely on him and avoid the mistakes, but I think the rookie mistakes, but I think that also makes Kamara more that pass receiving back that we're used to seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And what people were complaining about so much last year that he was not being used in that role. I think he goes back to that kind of stuff. And I think you're going to see, look, as far as I'm concerned, this is when that game was over with. I do not look at anything else after that play. That game ended there.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm sorry. But the I just feel like, that Carmichael and Allen were doing what they could do with the roster they had, so you had to use Kamara in ways that he wasn't used best at. I think if with Carr there, with these other backs, I think, and once Kamara is back into the fold, and all of this is completely behind us, I think that's when you're going to see Kamara look like the Kamara that we saw 2017, 2018, 2019. Yes, he is. Miller's recovering from a knee injury that he suffered in college. I have not seen anything. I don't know if you have, Bob, but I have not seen anything to show that he's behind on that schedule at all. My understanding, he's supposed to be ready come preseason.
Alan. Yeah, Tick. He is. He sat out pretty much all of minicamp and OTAs, as a precaution. But he was there. Allen and Miller both said the same thing that that Kendre will be cleared for training camp. And he is expected to be a full go. On the first day when rookies and veterans are both reported at the same time. So at this moment, anyway, everything we have heard tells us that Kendre Miller is on schedule to be a full participant for the start of training camp.
Good deal. So the Saints made another hire this weekend. They hired the analytics guy from the Jets. One of the criticisms of Dennis Allen this past season was his conservative nature, his hesitation to try and make a, go for them fourth down and kick field goals instead of, pushing for touchdowns and getting conservative late in games. And they attributed a lot of this to just his coaching style versus Peyton.
Yeah.
Do you think the analytics guy is going to have a bigger impact on Allen's willingness to go for it more often?
I doubt it, to be perfectly honest with you. And I say that for two reasons. Number one, they brought in a new analytics guy pretty late in the game. We're less than a month before training camp now. So really all he is going to have is some minor, in my opinion, some minor input through training camp, after roster evaluations and things like that. Secondly, a head coach a successful head coach often doesn't let the analytics guy, the behind the scenes guy, influence them too much in game day situations. I'll tell you who does influence a coach, be it successful or otherwise, are his assistants on the sideline. And that's where you could see a change in Dennis Allen. He has a guy that he worked with and trusts and is close to in Joe Woods, a guy that he knows and has worked with in Clancy Barone on the offensive side. He obviously has experience working with Pete Carmichael. It's those kind of, that kind of brain trust. Todd Grantham and Allen, I think, have a background as well. It's those guys they're all talking to each other on the headsets, and face to face on the sidelines during the game, and it's those guys that are going to have any kind of influence on how, if any way, Dennis Allen changes his game day coaching style.
Well, let's talk about this for a second then, because it looks like we said at the beginning of this year, this off season, that Allen had to make a decision what he was going to do. Was he going to turn over this roster? Was he going to fire coaches? What was he going to do to turn around a 7-10 season? It looked pretty bad in that last game of the year.
Yeah.
And he's done both. He's really reshaped a lot of this roster, and he has overturned his entire defensive coaching staff, except for the linebackers coach. He's brought in his own assistants. He's brought in his quarterback. He's brought in his analytics guy. So this is really Dennis Allen's team, and we've talked about this before, but how different do you think this team is going to look versus last year? And I know, obviously we're hoping it's better, but my question is, how different do you think this is going to be?
I think it's going to look a lot different. Let's start with the quarterback. I think we can all agree, no matter how you feel about Jameis Winston as a person, how you feel about Jameis Winston as a player, and whether you personally feel that Jameis Winston did or did not get a fair chance in New Orleans. Put all that aside. I think we can all agree that Jameis Winston was never the quarterback that Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael felt comfortable with. That much was clear when they had the opportunity to go back to Winston last season, where at least he was medically cleared. And they chose not to. They chose to stay with the comfortable choice in Andy Dalton. Well, with Derek Carr, they have a guy that Dennis Allen is certainly comfortable with. You think Pete Carmichael is comfortable with him because we talk about the relationship that Sean Payton had with John Gruden. Pete Carmichael had a close relationship too, because Pete and Sean were together all those years. There have been several times where Gruden has come in and advised. So he advised not only Payton, but he advised Carmichael and all those offensive coaches at that time. So it wasn't just Dennis Allen saying, I want Derek Carr as my quarterback. Pete Carmichael had to put the stamp of his approval on it too. So you now have the quarterback that you're comfortable with. You would think that would entice you to take more offensive chances, to be a little bit more open, to roll the dice on fourth down situations, field goal versus touchdown, late game aggression, that kind of thing. Defensively, like you pointed out, Dennis was the defensive play caller. Frankly, I expect him to be the same this year. But in Ryan Nielsen and particularly Chris Richard, who had only been with Allen and the staff 1 year prior to that, there might not have been a comfort level that he feels or felt with Joe Woods. Marcus Robertson, the new secondary coach, and even Todd Grantham, the defensive line coach. So, again, comfort is everything. When you're comfortable, you do tend to take a little bit more chances, at least to the outside observer. So, I do think that this team is going to look a lot more aggressive and a lot more comfortable on the field to even open this season.
I left this up from Anna because I think it's fair that we do explain that, but I want to say something about those coaches too, because I agree with you in that regard. I think Allen had some issues, not personal issues, but philosophical issues with some of Peyton's former assistants that were with him still. that he wanted certain things, and I think he kind of took over the defense when he saw the defense was failing to stop the run and generate turnovers and things like that. He started making roster changes. He started changing some of the coverages, changing the personnel, and blitzing a lot more. And I think that's part of the reason why the linebackers got so much more involved in the pass rush because he wasn't seeing that out of Marcus Davenport. He wasn't seeing it out of David Onyemata. He was seeing Cam Jordan doing what Cam Jordan does, but Cam Jordan's only one guy. So, now it is time to start sending these linebackers in, and we're going to blitz and we're going to do things because we can't just keep doing the same thing. And I think he did the same thing with Tyrann Mathieu, where he was having him kind of go down and play that roaming safety, and he was putting other guys in there. So, I think from that regard, now that he has his quarterback and now that he has his more of his kind of players around, and it's not that he didn't think that the Peyton's players were good enough, but I think he feels I can go for it now because I'm not going to have to rely on my defense because I have limitations at quarterback. I'm not going to have to rely on my defense so much because I have limitations at running back. I only have one real legitimate receiver. I don't know what I have really with this kid Shaheed. I think that's where you'll see the change. But back to Anna's question, explaining analytics. I have my own answers, but I want to get it out of you, Bob. What do you think the analytics, or how can you explain analytics?
Basically, I try to do it in layman's terms. Picture yourself in a casino, and at a poker table. And you are, of course, you're not anybody that has been in a casino knows you're not allowed to do this. But say I'm at the poker table, Alan, but you're my statistics guy, and you're allowed to be with me and stand over my shoulder, and you see what I have in my hand, and you're the one that tells me, hey, statistically, you need to give up these two cards because statistically you'll get two better ones. So
Queens.
What's that?
There are lots of queens. There's lots of queens coming up.
Yeah,
lots of queens. That's a Rain Man reference for you who are underage, but yeah. Lots and lots of queens.
It's actually funny you say that because analytics departments and analytics specialists first became popular in baseball. And
Moneyball.
And I hate Major League Baseball. I make no secret of that. But when it first became popular, I actually pictured Dustin Hoffman's character in Rain Man, going mumbling through team headquarters. Watner. Got to see Watner comes on at 4:00. Watner. But in layman's terms, that's what an analytics guy, that's what an analytics department does. They go to, thank you, Jerry. They go to your coaches, not only head coach, but positional coaches as well. Hit you with statistics, the obscure statistics. And they're best for third down, third down, fourth down gambles, whether to, and again, I'm keeping it very basic here, whether to run or to pass, or what kind of formations to run in these situations. It's an extension, a statistical extension of your scouting department.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to take it a little step further. And basically, it is laying out, when you lay out the game plan or how you want to attack a defense, how you want to attack an opponent, the analytics are involved in that too, because what are the percentages that this team is going to be in this defense if you run this formation and so forth? What are the percentages if you run go for it on fourth down at this point of the field? What kind of defense are they going to be in? Who are the personnel they're going to probably employ? It helps them analyze the film. Sean Payton loved analytics because it helped him decide when to challenge,
Yeah.
And he got a lot better about making his challenges because if you watch the 2006, 2000, even 2009 season games, Sean Payton is kind of basically emotional. He is challenging plays based on emotion. Did this
Yes.
piss him off? If this
Yes.
play pissed him off, he's challenging it. And sometimes you're like, "Oh, why are you challenging this? Why are you throwing a challenge in this? Because you're really not going to get this." But in some cases, they will use analytics on this. What are the odds that this crew, who tend to throw a lot of flags for pass interference, if you challenge certain plays, and you can't challenge pass interference calls, but if you challenge certain calls, this crew tends to respond after you challenge that call. They tend to respond in a certain way based on what they've seen other teams do. And you've heard him talk about this when he says, well, we're dealing with this crew. They tend to call a lot of holding calls. We're dealing with this crew. This crew calls pass interference pretty tightly. So it's just one step further, and you can get into a paralysis by analysis, which I think is something that Allen kind of got into last year because he doesn't have that gut feel that Peyton had because Peyton is naturally aggressive. So his analysis will be, if all else fails, I'm going for it, or, call something aggressive. Whereas Allen is much more of a defensive-minded coach. Allen's probably going to say, you know what, if all else fails, trust my defense to get the ball back. We'll flip the field with a punt. We'll get better field position because this is how they used to play football.
Yeah.
We'll get better field position because we're going to make them punt, and we'll be back instead of, say, at our 45 or our 30, we will be on their side of the field because their punters can't punt the ball as far. That's how they used to play football all the time. But yeah, so that's basically analytics, and it's just one more piece of information, and it helps you make better calls. So last week, I remember this. This is the infamous burning of the turf, the fire in the field. This guy won in '91. He won an all Madden thing because John Madden was calling this game between the Saints and the 49ers. And the guy had to go up into this lattice work they had beneath the old gondola and try and put out this fireworks display with burlap. And that was a huge hunk of burlap that actually fell, that caught on fire. I don't know who sent him up there with burlap, but they did. They did. It's funny when you watch these things, you remember, this is 32 years ago. It sure as hell doesn't feel like it.
No.
And speaking of one last thing on analytics, so I was watching the 87 49ers Saints game, the rematch in Candlestick. And oh my God, it was painful to watch Jim Moore's team. They literally did run, pass, punt, or run, pass, field goal. Terry Bradshaw and Dick Stockton are doing the game, and they're both openly questioning. They're not even trying for the touchdown. They're going for field goals. Why are they going to go for field goals? You can't beat Joe Montana with field goals. And, I'm just going, yeah, no shit. The other thing that made me laugh was, they run the tight end in motion. So now they got two tight ends on, say, the right side. They run a pitch play. Of course, the 49ers are stacked on that side. They run a pitch play to Ruben Mays on the right side. And guess what happens? You've got 6 guys coming and only 4 blocking. Somebody's getting Ruben Mays untouched. And surprise, the play doesn't work. Oh, man. I said if they had these games, people watching the Saints play like this, they would be waiting at the airport to go kill Dennis Allen.
Yes.
So, Bob, the other thing that we talked about, because you lost power 3 weeks ago and weren't able to be on the show, but the other thing we talked about, I I had Matthew, my son, jump on. We talked about Atlanta, we and Carolina and Tampa. We really spent a lot of time talking about Carolina because they seem to be the team that most of the prediction magazines and season previews of the 2023 season seem to think Carolina is the dark horse to even win the
Mhm.
division. Who do you think is going to be the biggest challenge to the Saints in 2023? Because obviously, you and I both think the Saints should win the division.
Yeah, and frankly, I think the Saints should win the division going away. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I, I know, national circles like to point out, almost gleefully point out how bad the entire NFC South is.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I expect most of the NFC South to be bad. I expect the New Orleans Saints to field a very, very good team. But you and I have talked about that most of the offseason. If there's a roster to challenge the Saints this year, I I agree with what you guys said a couple of weeks ago. I look at the Carolina Panthers, and from top to bottom, offense and defense. I take both into consideration, along with coaching, and I think the Carolina Panthers look like they have the roster to push New Orleans. Now, don't get me wrong, Atlanta. Atlanta looks like they're going to field a very physical team, something that we saw from the Falcons last year. The Falcons, all their personnel moves this offseason, point to that same kind of thing. And obviously, I love the Falcons bringing in Ryan. I hate it, but it was a wise decision for Atlanta to bring in Ryan Nielsen as a defensive coordinator. I love him as a coach. Defensively, I think the Falcons will be much improved. Offensively, I think they're going to be physical, but they have major questions at quarterback, and Desmond Ritter, and I don't see a direction for this passing offense yet. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
think they have enough weapons to, week in and week out, threaten NFL defenses. If their running game is stalled. And make no mistake, there's not going to be a lot of teams to slow the Falcons on the ground. But when they do, I don't think Atlanta will have an answer through the air. Carolina, on the other hand, I mean, obviously Bryce Young is an unproven rookie passer, but I really, really like this guy's mind, his football mind, and I think he's going to be a darn good quarterback. If he can withstand the punishment. Carolina and Atlanta both have major questions along the offensive line, but I think Carolina's offensive line is a little bit more advanced, than what the Falcons are, at least from a pass protection aspect. Atlanta, again, is built to run the football. Carolina is going to be built to pass the football. They want to do so, not only with the addition of Young, but their head coaching hire too. And Reich and Frank Reich. I think he's an outstanding football coach, and I think he's ultimately going to do a fine job. But my opinion, I think Carolina has too many young pieces that need to come together too quickly to be able to realistically challenge the Saints for the NFC South, at least this year. Oh, and Tampa Bay, I think, is playing for Caleb
I
Williams.
think the weaknesses of the Carolina offensive line. Oh, yeah, I do too. I do too. I think Tampa is they're tanking. They're going to fire their coach at the end of the year, bring in a whole new staff. They're going to shed a lot of payroll. I expect to see Tampa trading players at least by the trade deadline during the season for draft picks. So don't be surprised you see names like Mike Evans float around as a possible trade during the season, depending on how the season starts out. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if I don't know who the. I mean, I know Baker Mayfield is slated to be the starter. I don't know if Kyle Trask, what they're going to do with him, if they're even looking at him as a possible, future starter or whatever. But if the season is going south and Tampa starts, I don't know, 1-4, 1-2-6, something like that, that's when I think you'll see a fire sale
Yeah.
because they are going to be looking at draft picks. They're going to look at wanting to clear their cap. I mean, you see Devin White already bitching. You know, his name's come up quite a few times as trade rumors. You know, that's why they didn't bring these veterans back. Their attitude right now is, look, we won a Super Bowl 2 years ago. It's time to rebuild. And we won a Super Bowl because we built that team to win a Super Bowl, and now it's time to shed cap and build another one. So, yeah, I think Tampa is going to be at the bottom of the division. The funny thing is, I'm hoping Tampa wins enough games, and Jimmy Gumbo, you and I are thinking the same thing. I'm hoping Tampa wins enough games, loses a lot early, but wins enough games it kind of screws it up, and they're picking like 6 or 7.
Yeah.
You know, not 2 or 3. And if they really want Caleb Williams, they have to give away the farm to get him, much like Carolina did to get Bryce Young. But I don't know if they're going to be willing to do that if they think they're not going to get that far. But I agree. I think Carolina is your biggest challenge. They did sweep us last year with garbage at quarterback.
Yeah.
But, you know, I feel like, well, the first game, you know, clearly they should have pulled Winston at least at halftime. I think the longer he was out there, the more ineffective he got. You saw that as the game went on. And then that last game, it felt like they quit. You know, they were just done. I hadn't seen that in a long, long time from the Saints. But it just felt like they were just not emotionally into that game at all.
Yeah, if you didn't know any better, you'd think that the Saints were tanking the last 3 quarters of that football game.
Yeah. It just they look flat. That was the big thing. That's the only way I can put it. And that was the closest I felt that they'd ever quit on Dennis Allen, because I never felt like they quit at any point in the season. Hell, I thought the Cleveland game was one of their best efforts, followed up by the Philadelphia game. Those 2 games, like that was a team that like they had things figured out. And so I was very surprised by the Carolina game. But all that being said, I think that the Saints can beat Carolina because of the weaknesses on that offensive line. And I think when we talked about earlier about Todd Grantham, I think they brought that guy in to teach the Saints defense how to handle mobile quarterbacks. Because he has dealt with mobile quarterbacks in college. So, I mean, that's the part I'm kind of excited about. I want to see that. I want to finally see the Saints corral a mobile quarterback and beat the crap out of him for trying to run. And I think a guy like Bryce Young, he's not going to be able to take that beating. He needs a good offensive line to protect him, because if he gets an 8-sack game, I can't see him finishing that game. I think he'll want to, but physically I can't see him finishing a game where he gets sacked 8 times. Like I'm thinking about Troy Aikman's rookie season when he played the Philadelphia Eagles, and he was a piñata back there because he just had no protection. So, I mean, is that kind of how you see Bryce Young, as somebody who needs a great offensive line that he really can't take a pounding right now?
I do. I do. And again, you know, Bryce is a tough kid, but he's small. And I'll toot my own horn a little bit. I'm a tough guy, but I'm small. You can't beat physics. You can't.
No.
There's only so much beating a person of any size can take. Obviously, the smaller you are, the less beating that you can take. And the Saints, we know this about the New Orleans Saints defense, especially under Dennis Allen. they want to pressure the offensive backfield. They will often sell out to do so. They set their secondary up to play aggressive man coverage, so that way they can blitz, and bring extra rushers a lot more often. We saw them bring in Isaiah Foskey. We saw them bring in Brian Barisi, Kalen Saunders, Nathan Shepard, all very, very athletic guys. This is going to be a front seven that is going to remain aggressive, as we've been accustomed to with New Orleans, but it's a lot more athletic, in pursuit-wise than I think we've seen in the past. And Bryce Young, he's a solid athlete, but he's not a scrambler like a Lamar Jackson or a Justin Fields. Bryce Young is a guy that wants to stay in the pocket, or at least move around to make plays with his arm, not his legs. That's going to open himself up to a lot more hits than even a Lamar or a Justin Fields takes. And because of that, I'm very interested to see what the Carolina Panthers do to protect Young. Because remember, the Saints will get Carolina in week 2. And I know what the Panthers have said, about Andy Dalton being the potential starter to open up the year. If that happens, in the unlikely scenario that happens, Dalton's going to be under a very, very short leash. No offense against Dalton, but you spent all these assets to move up to the number 1 pick for a reason, to play him. So I would be frankly surprised if the Saints didn't see Bryce Young in week 2. With New Orleans being one of the more aggressive defenses in the NFL, that's going to be an early test for that young quarterback.
I'm looking up the schedule right now, because I'm curious to see who they open up with. Okay, so the first game is against the Falcons, and then they host us. So the Falcons on the road, well, that's an empty stadium, so that's,
yeah.
I mean, it's not like he's got to deal with a lot of pressure or anything like that. But that's going to be a physical team. I would expect to see Dalton probably play that game, but how long does he stay in? I don't know. It depends on how that game is going. But hosting on Monday night at home the Saints, I could see. Yeah, that is a Monday night game, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Monday night at home. That would be a good game to unveil Bryce Young. But do you want to take the chance that he's going to get the crap kicked out of him? I think how Dalton does against the Falcons defense will determine that, honestly. I think if Dalton takes a lot of sacks, but not because he's holding the ball too long, which he will be, if he takes a lot of sacks because it's like 1, 2, 3 and somebody's in his face, they may hold back on putting Bryce in and let Dalton take all the beatings. But if Dalton just has plenty of time back there and it's more coverage sacks or holding the ball too long, you could see Bryce Young come in that week against us. Yeah, and the Falcons, as far as they're concerned, I agree with you. Their identity, I think, is going to be a lot like the Saints from the standpoint of they want to be a power running team with an aggressive, physical defense. That's why they drafted Robertson. That's why they have Cordell Patterson. The running back they had last year wasn't that bad either.
No.
So the question is, can their offensive line open those holes and be that physical offensive line that they want it to be? And I think Atlanta's problem is they've got some receiving weapons in the tight end Pitts and the receiver George London. It's
London, yeah.
George London. They've got some receiving weapons, but I don't know how well their quarterback is going to play. I think he's a streaky passer right now.
At best.
Yeah, and I think he's due a little bit of a sophomore slump because people had film on him, where they didn't have film on him last year or enough film on him last year. I think that their primary thing is they want to be like the Giants from 1986, except they don't have a Lawrence Taylor,
Right.
much less any of the other Leonard Marshall, any of the other players they have in that Giants defense, but they want to play that kind of football. And it's weird because, the Saints are kind of turning into, that physical, run the football, we're going to throw the ball, but, it's going to be a run first offense with a great special teams, great defense. Both these teams are building like they're in outdoor stadiums that play in weather,
Yep.
but they're dome stadiums, and they've obviously had their most success playing that fast football on a track that you just don't have, and it's really strange how they're doing this. But
And very
they've done this
bewildering.
before.
And very, very 1980s, early 1990s style too.
Well, and it's funny because, you mentioned that, because I said that to you, I think, in a chat one time,
Mm-hmm.
that this is setting up very much like how the 1980s played out in the NFL. The class of 83, all those great quarterbacks, Elway, Marino, Kelly, Tony Eason, Ken O'Brien, all those quarterbacks went in the AFC.
Mm-hmm.
And the NFC didn't have the great quarterbacks because you think about who were the great quarterbacks. Well, you have Montana and Young, but that's one team. But outside of those guys, you had Jim McMahon, you had Tommy Kramer / Wade Wilson,
Randall Cunningham,
Phil Simms. The Cowboys were on a decline, so you had Danny White, Gary Hogeboom, Steve Pallor, because Scott Pallor was the Saints linebacker, his brother, who just passed away a couple weeks ago.
I saw that.
I saw that.
I saw that.
But yeah, and the Redskins, of course, went through three quarterbacks in that era. They had Theismann, and then they went to Jay Schrader. Then, obviously, Doug Williams won the Super Bowl for them. But because they didn't have the stud quarterbacks, they built those teams around great defenses with a power running game. And they just beat the crap out of you, physically beat you up. The 85 Bears, 86 Giants. Even the Redskins and the 49ers had great defenses. And, of course, the Saints had the great defense. Even during the Bum Phillips era, they had a much better physical defense that just took it to the next level once you got more linebackers. So I feel like we're seeing this kind of play out again with you look at all these great quarterbacks in the AFC. They're going to be quarterback driven. These teams have to compensate, and the way they're going to compensate is they're going to build their defense to stop those guys. And I think Todd Grantham coming to the Saints, he is going to be there to stop the mobile quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And that's what you see with Josh Allen. You see that with Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts, even Justin Fields. You see these mobile quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson. You need a defense now that knows how to stop those guys. Do you think that's a fair assessment? I know it's not going to be a perfect analogy, but do you think
and obviously the game has changed too, and that's why it's not a perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the assessment is correct. Obviously we're shortchanging some quarterbacks from the 80s. And shortchanging some NFC quarterbacks now. But if you look at the quarterbacks and the entire conference quarterbacks, in the AFC and NFC, it's very similar. And you look at the styles of defenses comparatively in the AFC and NFC, they're somewhat similar to what we saw in the 80s. Now I don't think we'll ever see. That's one of the reasons why the NFC went on, what was it, 13, 14 straight Super Bowl victories. We're not going to see that kind of thing again. Not in Goodell's NFL to begin with.
I I mean, I'm looking at these highlights in the background and I'm going, okay, that's a flag. That's a
Right.
flag. That's a
Right.
flag. They're not going to allow you to do that to people, where you're hitting them to that level that in the '86 season, Joe Montana got knocked out cold
Yeah.
by Jim Burt. And he just really leveled that dude. And they're not going to let that happen. They
Nope.
don't want that. They do not want to see star players knocked out of games. So they will pass the rules to protect those quarterbacks. And you're seeing the rule changes and the effects of that. But you are going to see defenses that will take away what you'd like to do
Hmm.
a lot more. And I think that's what, if they come up with a way, what would they call that play? The tush push that the Eagles kept running all Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You take that play away, and it makes it a lot harder for Jalen Hurts to do things because he was getting a lot of that stuff going through that great offensive line to make those plays. So, and then of course the Chiefs were just boom, 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 boom right down the
Yeah.
field right after that. That was a good Super Bowl, by the way.
It
That was a
it
lot
was, but
more
I
enjoyable.
hate Kansas City and I hate the Philadelphia fans, so it was difficult to watch. Uh,
Yeah.
but listen, I think you bring up a great example in Jalen Hurts. What are Who are one of the teams that the Saints are looking up? I personally, I don't think the Saints are looking at just the NFC South. I think
Mm-hmm.
the Saints believe in themselves strongly enough that they're looking at the entire NFC conference and what moves can we make to to be in contention to take this conference. Well,
Mm-hmm.
Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles are one of those teams that they're looking up at. And yeah, I know the Saints beat the Eagles last year, but you look at what Jalen Hurts did to that defense in the previous 2 years, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's why. And I love Ryan Nielsen, but I think that that's one of the reasons why I agree with you that Dennis Allen brought in Todd Grantham, a college defensive coach, that's used to dealing with these spread offenses and these mobile, run pass, RPO option quarterbacks. They're going to be far more equipped to have to handle that, and they need to be. If you look at their schedule, I mean, not only are you looking at dealing with a Jalen Hurts potentially in the playoffs, but you look at their schedule. They're dealing with a mobile quarterback in Bryce Young,
Mm-hmm.
a mobile quarterback in C.J. Stroud. Very mobile quarterback in Anthony Richardson. We've already talked about Justin Fields with the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
Desmond Ritter is going to, I still think at this point in his career, Desmond Ritter is going to make more plays with his legs than his arms, in Atlanta. Daniel Jones, same thing, makes more plays with as many plays with his legs as he does his arms. So, so you look at the schedule alone that the Saints have to face, and I think Grantham should be a very interesting and underrated hire.
Absolutely. And yeah, the Eagles will be interested to see, how they do losing both their head coordinators, because it used to be a rule of thumb: you lose your coordinator, your team tends to take a step back
Right.
because you look at the Falcons, for example. Yeah, they had the 25-point meltdown, but once Shanahan was gone, that offense was never as aggressive or as efficient as it was when Shanahan was calling the plays. The Patriots aside, who seem to lose coordinators left and right all the time and suffer no effects because of it.
On defense,
Most,
Josh
yeah,
McDouchebag stayed on offense, though. Remember
yeah,
that.
yeah. Oh, I know. But yeah, they a lot of teams that's what happens to them when the Eagles lost Frank Reich. It seemed like they took a step back. They weren't nearly as good. I kind of think they played over their heads anyway that season.
I do too.
But um, even if you play over your heads, you shouldn't fall as far as they did. And I think Carson Wentz, he was so good. He was a borderline MVP that
Yep.
season, and he just fell off the map that he's out of the league now.
Hmm.
And it's just even reuniting with Reich. he was never the same. It's like he just captured everything in 1 year. He was almost, the equivalent in music would be a one-hit wonder.
Yeah.
It's just, it's amazing because, and there's been a few quarterbacks like that. Even if he didn't get hurt, I felt that RG3 was somebody who's a one-hit wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a small quarterback as well. So that I don't think Bryce Young is on that path, but I think that is a good cautionary tale for Bryce Young. So yeah, I think that they are looking at this team very much so like this is a team that we not only want to win a division and win a playoff game, but we want to advance to at least the conference championship, if not the Super Bowl. How can we do that? We have to construct our team not only to win the NFC South, but also beat the other teams that we will be facing in the playoffs. And the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Giants, maybe, the Vikings, because I don't think the Packers are going to be in the playoffs, but the Lions even. Those are teams you have to. The Rams, the Cardinals, those teams are teams you're going to have to look at. And how do you beat those guys? 49ers too. I mean, all of them. But they all have this. It's funny. We talk about these teams that you got to beat, but at the same time, I can sit there and point to weaknesses in each one, and why they may not be as good as you think they've been.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the Eagles and 49ers, who I believe, they might not have the best 2 overall rosters, but they're 2 of the best 5 overall rosters easily.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the 49ers have a problem. Mm-hmm. We don't know what quarterback is going to play for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they lost their defensive coordinator, who is now head coach of the Texans. I think they have the talent to win, but do they have? I don't know. Is that defense going to be just as aggressive with a different coordinator? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, because not only did they lose Ryans, but just 2 years before that, they lost Robert Saleh too. So that's back-to-back defensive coordinator. There's only so many times you can promote from within and keep the same continuity.
Right. Exactly. So that's kind of my thing with this team is, you have the opportunity, but things have to break right. You have to avoid injury or significant injury. You have to have guys step up who have not stepped up so far, and we've talked about that in the past too. Mm-hmm. One of your favorite players, DeMarco Jackson, he's got him. I think he needs to make a step forward.
Oh yeah,
be that third linebacker. The former first-round draft pick from last season, the left tackle. I just drew a blank on his name. I can't believe this. I was just about to say his name. What is his name?
Trevor Penning.
Trevor Penning, thank you. Trevor Penning. So Trevor Penning has to make that step forward, and I think he needs to be starting opening day. Nightwell, is that a Deadpool shirt?
On him? No. Yeah. No, he has a bunch of crabs on his shirt.
Oh, crabs. I thought it was Deadpool.
No, he has just about every Avengers shirt you can think of, but not a Deadpool shirt yet. I think
I was going to question your parenting.
Right. Yeah, that would raise some eyebrows. I understand.
Yeah, you're right. He's still in the Spider-Man stage. We'll just stick with that. There we go.
But it is bedtime for the little guy, so it's time for me to wrap it up here too.
I hear you. Okay, real quick then, I did see a couple of your articles that came out. You had one on Nathan Shepard. Mm-hmm. We've talked about dark horses in the past, but what are some of the other things that you have coming up that fans should be looking for? And then also, what do you have going on at Bayou Blitz tomorrow?
And thank you. Check out the article that I put out for the Saints News Network this morning, this afternoon. They all blend together for me now. Mm-hmm. I listed two. Everybody wants to focus on Derek Carr, Jamal Williams, the newcomers, the high draft choices. I listed two dark horse, two underrated off-season additions and outlined Foster Moreau and Nathan Shepard. So yeah, check that out, folks. Tomorrow. Tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to be releasing a piece on if Kamara does face a lengthy suspension, will the Saints go out and bring in another veteran back for further depth and talk about some of the backs still available. And I'm also going to talk about in an article boomer bust players for the Saints this year. You mentioned Trevor Penning. That's one of the players that I'm bringing up. Michael Thomas. Defensively, DeMarco Jackson. He's a boomer, but we expect big things out of him. I expect big things out of him. But what happens if he doesn't deliver? Same with Marcus May, who's already coming off of what I thought was a very disappointing season. So, check out those articles over the next couple of days. Those are also topics, Brendan and I are going to talk about on the Bayou Blitz tomorrow, as well as further expounding on the Kamara situation. You and I checked off all the boxes tonight. Fielding viewers' questions like we always do, not only on this show, but on our show as well.
Well, one of the things I'd like you to think about for next week, top 10 Saints players on this roster. Because there's been so much change and because of the Kamara situation now, where would you put Kamara on a top 10 list? Would he even make your top 10 list of most important Saints players on this roster? Because I kind of have been putting one together in my head. Some of the names are shockers, but I think that there are some names that are on there in my head that, like we just said a minute ago, are guys that need to step up because you got to count on these guys. Because if these guys don't step up and you have to rely on someone else to come in, let's look at DeMarco Jackson, for example. If you have to rely on a Zach Bond instead because Jackson is just really a special teams guy, I think that's a significant weakness on the team because I think you've gotten the best of Bond. And you probably have to look at another, look in training camp at a cut from or a trade from somebody to kind of fill in that third linebacker spot. So just to give you an idea where I'm going with this top 10 list, because it's easy to say, okay, Cam Jordan, Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, yeah, those are top 10 guys, obviously, but guys to me that, these are 10 players or these are players that we have to count on. So that's something we can talk about next time. But I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that. And then we're what? Great. We're what, 2 weeks away from on training camp?
Rookies report July 18th, and that's veterans the following week on the 25th.
Okay, yeah, so 2 weeks because today's the 11th. Yeah, so 7 days. Next week is the rookies, and I think the veterans come in either the 28th or the 30th, somewhere around that time. Because it's a week difference. So, yeah. So then we're going to be talking about the first padded practice. Yeah. Probably the first weekend in August. Whew! And it's hot. I tell you what, this is going to be a brutal summer. I would not be surprised to see them have at least several of these padded practices, in that indoor facility. Because John Hill back in the background, it's going to be it's hot. I had to move some pictures with my dad, and I'm just standing outside, and I can feel the sweat running down my back and down my face. I'm going, I'm not even doing anything. I'm sweating like this. So yeah, they had a story. Last thing I'm gonna tell you, they had a story this morning in the news. Not trying to scare anybody right now, but whenever you get into August, you got to think about hurricanes.
I saw that.
The water temperature in the Gulf, because we've had a high pressure system over us so much of this summer already, in the upper 80s, low 90s on surface temperature, not deep, but surface temperature, which is like ideal temperature for a Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricane to grow in the
Yes,
Gulf.
sir.
Now we have a lot the high pressure. That's the bad part of the high pressure system. The good part of it is it keeps a storm from coming because it hits that high and spins off towards the east each time because it's a sweat box, but it's a pressure system. Hurricanes are low pressure systems. They can't push a high pressure system out the way. They just skirt along the side and turn out. So yeah, August always. It's the worst time, the 29th. We've talked about cutting that date out of the calendar because that was Katrina and Ida back to back. So, yeah, that's coming too. So, in the meantime, thanks everybody for joining us. I appreciate all your messages of condolences. It means a lot to me. I'm sorry we missed a couple weeks, but I'm glad to be back. Glad to be back talking with you, Bob. And check y'all tomorrow night, 8 o'clock on the Bayou Blitz. I'm sorry, did y'all have a guest a couple weeks ago? Y'all had a guest on a couple weeks ago, didn't you?
We had John Hendricks. We had John Hendricks checking in with us.
Okay, y'all had John, that's right. Y'all had John Hendricks. God, it's been a blur because it's been, a month since you had Everett on. What has it? 6 weeks maybe? I think it was the beginning of June. Yeah. I'm telling you, this June just blew by me.
It did.
It really did. So I was just going to say, keep an eye on the guests for Bob's show too. It's always a special treat when y'all get guys in there to come talk about different stuff, especially former players. So thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Under the Dome. Good night, everybody.